All right, everybody. Good evening or afternoon or whatever time of day it is for you. Naturally, as you could see by the title, we're joined again by, I think you're like our most frequent or my most frequent non-live stream guest, like because I do the regular stream too. But yeah, so hold on,
I'm,
I'm hearing echoes on my part.
I'm always happy to be here, Politicrat.
Yeah, hold on. I'm sorry. Hold on. I have myself pulled up. Yeah, I need to find out where this is coming from. Technical difficulty.
Sure.
Oh, um, there we go. I got to exit out of that. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I had the actual video tab open, so I was hearing myself everything we were talking about. Anyway, sorry about that, everybody. But yeah, most frequent one-on-one guest. Um, Thanks for coming on today. Just to give everyone background, been on a Scorsese binge lately. That gave me the idea to do this stream. We did a similar one a little over a year ago where we just talked about film and philosophy. But today, and I know you and I briefly talked about it, we want to talk about cinema and like actual works of cinema as a reflection, sort of the modern condition of society, or whether modernity, post-modernity, hyper-modernity, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I know they're all different things, but I guess however somebody sees it. But yeah. So, um, anything you want to say in particular, just to start off, or
Oh, let's do it. Let's jump in.
all right, yeah, let's do it. All right, yeah, I'm trying to think. I guess we might as well just start having a free chat about Scorsese, see where that goes.
Sure.
So, but yeah, no, like I said, I watched a Taxi Driver for the first time all the way through um, the other day. I was thinking throughout the entire thing. I know I think we probably brought this up on every stream because you can all tie it back to him, but Toynbee's Internal Proletariat, that was going through my head for the entire film. Like, this is a guy who's just abandoned by society, and he feel like, but then at the end, the irony is that society celebrates him for doing what he did, which almost shows like, is society just as fucked up as he is? Is he just as fucked up about it's strange because like the society he ultimately hates makes him a hero. So it's just kind of like a paradox. Maybe that's not the best word for it, but it's just it's a beautiful sense of irony that I feel like not a lot of people really discuss when they're covering that film, specifically the ending.
Yes, absolutely. It's a masterpiece. It is
Yeah,
all, and it has a mythological substructure, which is
really.
interesting. Which is interesting because with Scorsese, he's basically a realist for the most part, except for maybe Last Temptation of Christ, one or two others. He's mostly what you would call a realist. Um, and I regard realism as the death of all art. Realism kills art. Art wasn't meant to be realistic. We have reality out here. We need art to transfigure and transform reality. But then with deceptively realistic narratives like Taxi Driver, which seems, in terms of its surface structures, to be realistic, you've got the deep mythological structure that is underneath it, which has to do with rescuing the captive maiden from the dragon. And in this case, of course, the dragon is the pimp, and the Jodie Foster character is the captive maiden. And this is a man who sees himself totally alienated from the social order. You're right, in a certain sense, he is a kind of internal proletariat of one. By Toynbee's definition, the internal proletariat
It's more of
is
a group. It's more of a group of people, but like he's like the proto. He's like it's
yeah,
like before the internal proletariat coalesces. It's like
yeah, he's
the
like
proto prol.
normally a group that's in a
Yeah,
society but is no longer of it because it has seceded from the body social due to its disaffection with the dominant minority that used to be the creative minority that could lead by mimesis but can no longer do so. So now the dominant minority leads by force. And
yeah,
that causes the secession of the internal proletariat. And of course, Toynbee's model for that was the Christians. They are the classic internal proletariat seceding from the body social of Roman society. So, in a sense, he is a kind of miniature internal proletariat who is seceded from the body social because he's totally alienated. He does not, he suffers from what most of our spree killers suffer from, which is the lack of a we feeling. there is no sense in which he feels like a we. He's just an I, and the society has failed to incorporate him, as it has failed, especially in American society, as it has failed to incorporate so many of its individuals who end up feeling alienated, isolated, and they want to hurt the society. And the best way
Yeah,
to hurt back is through a spree killing.
and
That's aggression directed at the whole social order.
it's not a monolithic group when we're referring to America today. It's like you see it just manifesting in a bunch of different groups, a bunch of different people. Like, I mean, it's the same phenomenon, just expressing itself with like groups. I think of both Black Lives Matter and sort of like the more hyper like nationalists, like the like far right movements too, as well as just like the white working class too, and like the Rust Belt, um, a lot of people in like urban areas. And I mean, of course, they don't all believe in the same things, but they're almost like all feeling sort of the same effects of the dominant minorities. Sort of, I don't want to use the word oppression, but their dominance.
Yep, absolutely. And so we're seeing this proliferation in our society right now of these spree killers who are, fit the same pattern as does Travis Bickle and the character of the Joker in the movie.
Yep.
The Joker, it's the same pattern. And it's if you study, and I've studied a number of these fellows and written essays about them in various of my books.
Yeah, I read your Joker one a few years ago. I don't remember.
Yeah, and in Cultural Decay Rate and a couple of other books, I've profiled a number of them just to get inside their heads and see what led to this. To try to look at it in an objective and neutral way. I wrote about the Columbine kids in my book Age of Catastrophe, just to see what leads to this. And in every case, the pattern is the same. It is disaffection, alienation, isolation, loneliness, and the lack of a we feeling. This was, set up by Charles Whitman, who was the first spree killer back in the 1960s. It might have been 62 or 3, somewhere in there, where he was an individual who was a disaffected Marine. He failed at being a Marine. He failed at being a family man.
He tried to kill Nixon, didn't he? I think
no,
that was him.
That's John Hinckley. This is
no. John Hinckley tried to kill Reagan.
Tried to kill Reagan.
There was a guy who tried to kill Nixon too, I think. Like Travis Bickle was loosely based on. I forget his name though.
I've never heard of that. Interesting. No, this is Charles Whitman. There's nothing political going on here. He's just a failure at marriage. A university, he tried to get a degree, didn't work. Marine, he failed at everything. And of course, he also had, as it was later found out, a brain tumor. And he was suffering from constant headaches, and he was constantly popping pain pills for the headaches, but he was also taking pills that were the equivalent of speed back then. I forget what they're called. And
over the counter. It was all over the counter weight loss stuff.
It was all over the counter, yeah. And he was just popping these pills that would keep him up for days at a time. He once or twice, maybe famously, was up for, I think, 4 or 5 nights in a row. So
5 nights is my record.
Really, that's an achievement. I think 2 is probably mine.
What's funny is I finally went to sleep when I heard the Dune music, like the theme from like the new Dune movie, and I was like, "Is that coming from my computer? Where is that coming from?" And I was like, "Crap, I'm hallucinating this." So I went to bed.
Yeah. But no, he was failing at everything. So there was no we feeling whatsoever for this individual. So then what he did was in Austin, Texas, at the University of Austin, climbed a miniature skyscraper, the tower there on the campus, which is very tall, kind of a miniature skyscraper. And he climbed up there and got to the top and then started firing down on the green below, shooting everyone. A pregnant woman, killed both her and her baby, a bunch of people. I don't know, it was something like 16 or 17 deaths and a bunch of injuries before cops got up there to the top of the tower and shot him and killed him. But the interesting thing, too, to note is that a skyscraper, it's invented by Americans, of course, because it's based on an I feeling. This is my money, and I will feed this skyscraper money to make it grow. And it looks like a capital letter I. So this is about me, the I feeling, the Donald Trump world. This is me, my achievements, not yours. Stay away. So in lack of a we feeling, you have Whitman going up to the top of this tower. Now he's the I. He's the capital letter I who's ahead of everybody else, on top of everybody else. And now he has control of the individuals on the green down below, who are just these little units. They're no longer human beings. They're just units that can be deleted at will. Taxi Driver shares a similar kind of mentality to the classic spree killer. The same kind of mentality, same kind of alienation. So it becomes difficult. The wonderful thing about the film is that as you're watching it, it becomes difficult for you to make a moral judgment either for or against Travis Bickle, because on the one hand, what he does is horrific. all the violence that the film climaxes with. But on the other hand, you do sympathize with him to a certain degree, with his alienation and with his love for the Jodie Foster character. So that's what great art does. It should make you squirm. It should
Yeah,
make you.
no, I mean there is the scene.
Solutions whatsoever.
The only so the scene where it was like the pimp kissing Jodie Foster, that is the only time in a film that I like almost threw up.
Yeah.
Like, and I like it did the right like it did its job basically because it's but yeah, back to what you were saying about Travis Bickle. It's like yeah, what he does is horrible because he does it for completely selfish reasons. He's trying to I don't know, he's doing it for himself for somewhat like nihilistic reasons. Yet at the same time, yeah, he does slay the dragon as you were saying. He does save the princess. And I mean, I can't think of a single better parallel to the because the dragon is supposed to be the ultimate enemy, the sort of the thing that society's supposed to revile, the thing we're supposed to slay. I can't think of a more appropriate analogy than a pedophile.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because yeah, it's the thing that like
It does evoke a certain amount of sympathy. It's complex. It's not, it's generally regarded as Scorsese's best film for a reason. It's extremely complex.
I'm still partial to Goodfellas, but I think it's right up there.
I am too. I agree with you about that. I think I prefer Goodfellas.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a work of art. It's
Yeah.
pretty spectacular.
Yeah, Goodfellas is like one of those films. It's one of those films you cannot get tired of watching. Like
No, I've
over
seen
again.
it probably
It's like
20 times, something
it's
like
like the
that.
opposite of Schindler's List.
Oh no, I love Schindler's List too. I've seen that also
Oh,
probably
great movie, but
20
it's
times.
not one.
Yeah.
It's not one to rewatch.
These are. I just started off by saying that realism is the death of all art, and these are realist movies. But they have mythical substructures. Schindler's List is a sort of coded description of Moses. It was originally called Schindler's Ark, and they changed the title to Schindler's List. But it was the Ark and the idea that Schindler is saving the Jews. He's this sort of Moses figure, creating this sort of miniature exodus from the Nazi state apparatus, like the Egyptian state apparatus that Moses saves the Jews from. So there are mythical substructures buried again underneath the realist surface structures.
Yeah.
Now, as far as structures in Goodfellas go, I don't know. I just love the damn movie. I think it's told. It's based on a true story. It's told faithfully, and it's really, really funny. I mean, it just manages to be because you can't believe that guys like this actually exist that are this amoral and depraved. It's unbelievable.
Greatest opening line in cinema too. I think ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to be a gangster. It like sets the tone. It sets the wacky, ridiculous tone of the movie. Yeah.
Into the American myth of the gangster, which goes all the way back to the 30s with Public Enemy, James Cagney, those kinds of films. So it does have its own mythos. Scarface, also with Al Pacino, plugs into the same mythos, the myth of the American gangster. Individualism gone awry, let's say.
Yeah, no, that's actually exactly what I wanted to lead on to, because it's almost like, and again, like Nietzsche, it was like one of his main criticisms of the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment was like a double-edged sword. It brought a lot of good things, but then the materialism and the individualism eventually, the like the logical endpoint was ultimately the atomization. I mean, individualism is a good thing, but then when you get to too much individualism, man becomes an island.
Yep. Yeah. America is a paragon for that, and the reason why we have the highest rate of spree killings in the world.
Yeah.
Individualism that's just gone too far.
So, but speaking of spree killings, what's your take on, because do you think that maybe the media, because again, like the media is also incentivized to try to find these killings and report on them as much as possible. So it seems like there are a lot more of them than there used to be. Yet also I've seen statistics, and I'm not a huge Steven Pinker fan, but I did read his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I think, which did show like all of this empirical evidence showing that mass shootings is like actually on a rapid decline. But again,
it's incorrect. No, that's totally wrong. I've looked at the data too as well, and I went back and looked at school shootings, looked at the data, and back as far as the 60s is really roughly when they first start. They're mostly just 1 and 2 people that are being shot and killed. 1 and 2, maybe 3 at the most. You might find a 4 until Columbine. Then you get to Columbine and the number escalates dramatically to what is it, 15, 16 people, something like that. Then it's a one record setter after the next. Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, each one. I think Virginia Tech remains the highest. Was it like 30 people killed? No, they're getting worse. There's Steven Pinker's wrong. He's a rationalist. He's shallow and he's empty-minded. I have no respect for guys like this with all their empirical data. No, he's totally wrong. He's not looking at the facts. The phenomenon is happening to the point where now it's almost every day. When you go on YouTube, and I follow this, you go on YouTube, there's almost a new shooter every day, whether successful or not, whether it's 2 kids, 3, 4, 5, or 10. We had the Buffalo shooter. Before that, we had in Boulder, Colorado, not that long ago, we had 10 people killed in a supermarket. We had, the killing at the plant in Illinois. The just one after the next, the FedEx plant.
And do you remember back in 2014?
It's really getting worse. It's not. Pinker's dead wrong. Sorry.
Do you remember back in 2014 the Elliot Rodgers shooting?
No.
Really? Okay, that was a big thing. So he was a YouTuber who eventually started going complaining about how women didn't like him and about how everyone hated him and how he basically deserved respect, and made this long rant video that he posted on YouTube. Then he went to his college and he ended up going to different clubs and groups that he hated, and he shot up I don't know, it was the campus Republican club, and then he went and shot what he thought was the hottest sorority on campus, and was just targeting based on these specific factors. But it was a big thing back then. But yeah, he just felt isolated, not a good guy. But that's
they all good. And I believe that pretty much all of them are incels, almost every single one of them, and that plays a role. Now here's the problem with the whole, and they're getting younger. It seems like it's, the Uvalde guy was 18, and the Buffalo kid 18. They're getting younger, so they're at that age when sexual frustration, if it isn't fulfilled, gets at its maximum. 18, 19, 20, late teens, early 20s. If it isn't fulfilled, the male self-esteem goes down and it drops precipitously. Now the problem with this is that there's an identity issue that's buried up in here. Men have to become something. Women do not like men who don't know who they are, who don't have a sense of identity, and who aren't on a track to achieve something. You will never attract a woman if you don't have a strong sense of who you are. And none of these kids do. None of these male shooters have the slightest idea who they are, or what they're doing on the planet. Women don't like that. So part of the problem is the failure of young males in this American culture to achieve a stable sense of identity, because so much of the traditional models for being masculine and being a man have been deconstructed by the woke left, and they've just left a pile of ruins, and they don't realize the damage that they're doing to young men in the society who really are looking for role models, and they're looking for a sense of meaning. What do I mean? What can I do? And they're suffering from terribly low self-esteem. And it's like a vicious circle, a feedback loop. They have the low self-esteem. Women don't want to be around them. That reinforces the fact that they think they're losers. And it just becomes this terrible inner vicious voice constantly saying, well, I am a loser. Of course, I can't get women, so obviously I'm a loser. That's proof that I'm a loser. So that's the problem, that young men in this society need good role models, good, strong male role models to help guide and shape their psyches so that they have a good sense of who they are. Then they'll attract women. That just goes without saying. So there's a lot of complex social problems that are tangled up with this whole problem of the rise of young male spree killers. I think the only one who was an older male was the Vegas shooter. That's kind of a puzzle to me. That guy was 50 something, 60 something.
Is this the Mandalay Bay, the casino?
The guy, no, back in October of
2017 in Vegas, right?
Yeah, 2017.
Yeah, the Mandalay Bay Casino. Yeah, I think that's.
And
wasn't he at a concert? It was I don't know,
some sort of country.
One of the
concert. Yeah.
was like one of those.
shooting from a window and just killed a whole bunch of people. And he had money. He was a guy who was not poor by any means. He had a lot of money. So that one's a bit of a mystery to me. I'd like to sit down and dig into that one sometime and find out what went wrong there. But that's atypical. That's off the typical profile.
Whenever I know, but whenever I hear of this, like again, society, I think this is just my view, but the very first time I read a game of chess, that is exactly what it reminded me, like the atomization sort of a people in our like a game of chess, right? Part 2 of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Oh yeah, part 2 of The Wasteland. Yes, okay. I thought
That, yeah, yeah, that's what it's all like. It's all about. Especially, it's like one of the lines is "Speak to me. Why do you never talk to me? Does anybody hear me?"
Yeah.
And like then also,
yeah.
And then also about how even in in chess, it's an allegory for sex, and that he's basically saying sex and about how sex is basically all about
between the sexes,
manipulation and power. Yeah,
your move. No, it's your move. My move. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. That is a wasteland situation, and the wasteland. That poem still to this day is an excellent vision of what happens in a degenerate society where we lose this sense of a we feeling, and there's this withdrawal into alienation and isolation. And Eliot's solution in the last section, what the thunder said, is compassion. That greens the wasteland. That is the thing. That is what the thunder said. When it brings the rain, that's compassion.
Yeah.
Control. Give, be munificent, be generous, sympathize with other people's plights, and control yourself. That's it. That's the exact solution to the wasteland that we really need right now in this society. So that poem remains as relevant now, perhaps
absolutely
more so than
my favorite poem of all time. Yeah,
mine too. Actually, I agree with you.
But yeah, it actually reminds me. There's a really great Ben Franklin quote, and he was very like secular in his personal life, but a really good quote. He said like the way for society, like an ideal society, the way a society will be healthy if men follow the examples. Specifically, I think he said it was you'd probably disagree on the Socrates part, but he said Socrates and Christ. Those are the two models he thinks.
I would disagree with the Socrates part.
I know you're more partial to Plato. I'm an Aristotle. I'm an Aristotle guy. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it's also because I'm a big Aquinas fan too. So that's probably
yeah. I do like Aquinas. I haven't really dug into him, but I like the various summaries I've read. I am looking forward to spending some time with him at some point.
Yeah. But yeah, no. So it almost makes me wonder. Again, you see people like Travis Bickle. You see people like what was the Joker's name? Was it Arthur something? I think.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah. But with them, it almost makes you question, like, at what point? Because I mean, yeah, we need to remember, it's easy to blame society because we're all responsible for our actions. But then again, at what point is it society's fault? Like, is there, like, again, it's easy to blame society, and it's easy to. But at the same point, it's possible that society collectively, the zeitgeist, is in a way, or not making them be like that, but subtly just or influencing them, I guess, if that might be the best.
Well, society plays a huge role. It's a bit of both because if Spengler is right, and I believe that he is, in a degenerating civilization, you get depravity, moral depravity, a loss of values, nihilism, meaninglessness, atheism, all that spreads as part of the basic social milieu of a declining society in which you have these cosmopolitan world cities that have become totally disconnected from conservative traditions, religious traditions, spiritual traditions, and regard those as, the rube out there living in his shack in the countryside. Of course, he believes in God. He's a rube. That's a problem right there. It's a big problem. But then on the other hand, we do have free will. Each and every one of us does have a degree of free will to respond to the conditions that the society gives to us. We can be violent against it if we want, or direct that violence toward yourself and master yourself. Use the will to power on yourself. That's what the religious traditions would say. You master yourself. You take that, what in Kundalini Yoga is called the third chakra, which is the chakra at the level of the belly, which is the Manipura chakra, the will to power over others. It's aggression. that becomes sublimated at the level of the throat. Because the third chakra, and then you get the fourth chakra, which is the chakra, the heart chakra, compassion. And then at the level of the throat, it's called the Vishuddha chakra, and it has to do with asceticism. So it takes the power of the third chakra and transubstantiates it toward will to power over yourself. Again, with Eliot, control. Learn how to control your passions. But then a monkey wrench into all of that. That all sounds nice and clean, but mental illness skews a lot of that. So there's a lot of these individuals are seriously mentally ill and aren't getting the care that they need, and that causes that mental illness warps free will. So it actually reduces. The more mentally ill you are, the less your will is free.
And usually, yeah, and what's interesting, what's interesting is I don't think there's any it's not a coincidence that there is a correlation between mental illness, atheism, and suicide.
Yeah.
And then also it's interesting, laziness too, but also higher IQ. It's like the higher IQ somebody has, the more likely they are to be lazy, which is interesting.
Really? You think so?
Oh yeah, it was like there were studies that
lazy in my life. I have been nothing but constantly on the go, constantly on. In fact, if I have to be, because I have to take periodic breaks, or my brain will just drive me crazy and I won't be able to sleep. I have to force myself to wind down at the end of the day. Or I don't know. I don't see the correlation, but maybe you're right.
Yeah. But hold on.
Give an example of this. What are you talking about? Who's lazy? Who has a high IQ? Mostly high IQ people are out trying to build civilization.
Yeah. No, I think we're not that, or not laziness, but I think motivation. That's a bit like, yeah, you can motivate.
Correlate it with mental illness, and there I would have agreed with you. Yeah, there's a lot of high IQ people who are mentally ill, but still they mostly build civilization. I mean, think of the movie A Beautiful Mind, about the guy with the mathematical brain. I don't know if you've seen it, but you should watch it. Who was schizophrenic. He was imagining that he's talking to all these different people.
Great movie.
It is a great movie, yeah, and it highlights this fact that high IQ, the higher your IQ, the more likely there is to be some form of mental illness that goes along with it, because it's almost like the brain has a certain quanta of energy to it, and when you highlight or emphasize one part of it, it drains energy from other areas. This is my idea anyway, that I think that the higher the IQ, the more hypertrophic the neocortex is, then the more emotional problems you have. Then there's a deficit there that energy is being used up by the neocortex. But that's how civilization gets built.
I think what the correlation is because, so depression, bipolar disorder, especially like something like bipolar disorder, or it's schizophrenia too, which has these same like there's like depressive episodes, for instance, a big part, but then there's the mania aspect too, which again, very productive stage. But yeah, so I think it is the depression aspect. Again, depression is a mental illness, but
bipolarity is very, very common. Vincent van Gogh.
Isn't it like 7%? I think it's 7% of the population have it to some degree. I think that was what it was. I don't know. Don't quote me on that.
Like 7 to 10% of the population has an IQ as high as Vincent van Gogh's or Leonardo's, or people who clearly had some form of bipolarity.
Yeah. Churchill was another example. He was
he was bipolar?
Yep.
I know he was alcoholic. He was a functional alcoholic.
There's another correlation there too.
yeah, there is. Bipolar people tend to be alcoholic to try and numb those emotional extremes. I have experience with this. I'm both bipolar and alcoholic, so I've had experience with this my entire life. It's a struggle.
Yeah, but speaking of, I think really the term mental illness is kind of like a misnomer too, because it's not an illness in the same way like a physical, like something like COVID-19, which is like the same for everybody. That's why I prefer the concept like neurodivergence, because it's like that. The reason I prefer that concept is because everyone's brain chemistry is fundamentally different. But
Yeah.
then the people that you would like lump into a category, because it's all about taxonomy, it's all about putting them into a general category,
Mhm.
because there are some people, like a minority of people, who have brains that will like differ due to different biochemistry than like the general person that's like a part of like the smaller population. So it's not so much that they're quote unquote ill, but they have different traits and different, and their brains work very different abnormally than the average person. And so in order to kind of diagnose the problems with that, or just sort of the issues that do come with that kind of brain chemistry, and then that's why the labels of like different mental illnesses come about, just to lump into the similar people into the same category so you like know how to medicate them and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
definitely recommend I forget, Thomas Zaz, The Myth of Mental Illness,
No,
back from the 60s.
I
Yeah.
know who that is. I haven't read it, but yeah.
Mhm. But Toynbee's Internal Proletariat, though. So I've only read the abridged version of Study of History, so maybe he talks about it in the full version. But he, I don't remember him ever going into detail regarding the internal proletariat, whether it emerges, whether there's a purpose that they originally start with, like do they just emerge, or, and it's like not a monolithic group. It's like, I don't know, because he seems to describe them as like monolithic groups, like, oh, it's the Christians, oh, it's like the gladiators rising up.
Yeah.
But is it seems to me like it would make more sense to just a bunch of disparate people who all feel very similarly, but just have similar beliefs, but they don't really coalesce into a common identity. Like, does that make sense? Because I feel like he doesn't really go into detail over whether what the cause is, whether it's them or whether it's society. Like, I don't know. Am I making sense?
Well, it's always some form of disaffection with the leadership in the society. Like he also gives the example of the Ptolemaic Fellahin, who are constantly being conscripted by the Ptolemaic authorities to fight wars against the Greek Seleucids, and they don't want to do that. Why should we fight your war against the Greeks? They don't want to do that. So that's another group. But normally, the cause, as far as I can tell, is disaffection with the leadership. They don't like where the leadership is going, what they're doing. That tends to be the main cause. Just like, America has step outside the spree killer model, but we have had internal proletariat spring up from Ruby Ridge down to Waco, and a whole bunch of them, including the Unabomber, spring up, who are completely disaffected with the American government. And those are internal proletariats. Brief ones, none of them lasted very long. But you can see the tendency, and that started in the 1990s. It wasn't there before the 1990s, that kind of disaffection. So you can see it kicking up. It's already a fire that's ignited, and it'll only get worse, like any mental illness does in a person. This is a civilizational mental illness. It'll only get worse over time until there will emerge some sort of internal proletariat who will break away from the American leadership and
with an identity, with a common like, okay,
stable identity of following a population. They'll form their own society. It's inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree on that point. But yeah, no, it's like goes back to the Wasteland, because in a sense I like read the Wasteland as more or less being, it's almost, so he's talking about society as a whole, as a collective. He almost like describes society, just how he writes it. It's like as if he characterizes society as if it itself has a mental illness, as if society itself, as like a single organism.
Yeah, it is a kind of analysis of the Western society. He's a displaced American who moved to England, so he had one foot on either side of the Atlantic, so he got a good broad overall view of the West as a whole, and that's what that poem is giving you. This is the decadent West. It's degenerate, and it's falling apart. It's very consistent with Spengler, who was publishing Decline of the West at the exact same time.
Yep, and also James Joyce with Ulysses, F. Scott Fitzgerald with Gatsby. Yeah,
all those guys
came out the same year. Yeah,
Ulysses, Wasteland, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Yeah, Thomas Mann with The Magic Mountain, 1924. They're all analyzing the ills of the West and doing so in a very correct way.
Hmm.
in a very prescient way that has only gotten worse with time. So those guys were correct.
Yeah. Would you say like a good example of an internal proletariat? Because I was just this is just a thought that came to me. So I know you're not a huge fan of the traditionalist school, but I think of people like René Guénon and Friedrich Schuon. I think that's how you pronounce his name,
Yeah,
and Martin Lings also, who's the greatest Shakespeare scholar of the 20th century. But
Titus
how they
Burckhardt,
what?
Titus Burckhardt also.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. But but it's because they inherently were searching for religion, and they were very attached to like the Christianity of their youths, but they didn't really they didn't like the direction it was going in. I know there was a polemic written by Lings against the Vatican too, which he of course didn't like, but because they were all most of them were raised Roman Catholic, especially the because they're a large French population, of course, but then they all convert to Sufi Islam because they're like, yeah, no, this is
Yeah,
there's like no life left in Christianity in their eyes. So it's kind of interesting leaving civilization, going. They almost are an internal proletariat that leaves to become an external proletariat or join another society. It's an interesting example, I think, like the converts.
yeah, that's certainly true of Rene Guénon. I'm not sure it applies to Titus Burckhardt. I don't think he ever did
No,
that.
no, 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 not Burkhardt.
And then there's Julius Evola too as well.
Yeah. I
I
was
haven't
talking
read these
to
guys in any.
Paul Fahrenheit. I know we won't say his actual name, but somebody you and I
I know
both
who.
know. We
Yeah.
yeah, long conversation about Evola the other night. So
I still
yeah.
haven't read him. Uh, I might fix that at some point. We'll see. He's fascinating.
Let's talk about Blade Runner.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah. No, so that's one I just saw for the first time recently as well. And theme of like sentience, what makes a human. And I know you see with oh what's his name again? Harrison Ford's character. I can't believe it's
Deckard.
yeah, 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 Deckard.
Yeah.
Um in a sense, he's he's almost the inverse of somebody like Travis Bickle, maybe in a sense, where he's kind of feeling that same isolation, but of course he's not he's part of the establishment at the same time. Um, so he's like good at his job, but he has no but he doesn't have a sense of or like a sense of meaning anymore, more or less, because it's pretty much the same old humdrum thing over and over and over, even though he has a cool job.
Yeah.
But it's you read the book, right?
Yeah.
Andrew
Couple
Dream
of
about
times.
electricity.
Two or
Yeah.
three. Yeah.
But what would your take on that be? Just at least sort of what
For
I
one
have to say,
thing,
and then
you have to see that Deckard is plugged into a different American myth, which is the myth of the hard-boiled film noir type. It's not
hmm
film noir. It started in novels in the 1930s with James M. Cain and guys like that. Dashiell Hammett, who's one of my favorites of this, where you describe the life of a hard-nosed private detective or cop, and there's a certain formula that goes with that also, the cowboy has his own formula as well.
the
Uh,
pirate, the Viking.
they all have their own, and part of the formula of the hard-boiled detective is that he's always either divorced or alone. He can't be in a relationship. There's no girlfriend. They're always portrayed as having trouble with women or disliking or despising women. Very often they're divorced, all the way down to, the novels of what's his name in California there, Los Angeles, Raymond Chandler. Uh, they all have the same basic archetype. So they're alone by nature because that's part of the formula that this private detective guy, he doesn't need anyone. He's just totally, entirely self-sufficient, almost like a cowboy, totally self-sufficient. So he doesn't need anyone. And he's perfectly happy being alone. So it's a very different type from the Travis Bickle spree shooter type.
It's like
Totally
the
different.
inverse. Yeah.
The spree shooter wants community, and the community says, no, go away from us. Uh, the Deckard, a hard-nosed detective type, doesn't want community, doesn't need it, and doesn't care. And woman represents community. That is the erotic principle of connectivity par excellence, and they don't want that. So he has a different kind of loneliness. But yeah, you are right, though, about the meaninglessness of his life. He's just going through one job after the next, killing one replicant after the next, and not even questioning whether there's a morality to this. Is it moral to kill these individuals who are genetically engineered, so they're synthetic, So there's a kind of racism involved there. If you're synthetic, it doesn't matter that you're human in all these other respects. You're synthetic, so you're in a different category. So it never really occurs to him to wonder about the morality of it until they throw him this monkey wrench with Rachel, whom he falls in love with, who does not have a 4-year lifespan. Her
Oh,
life,
she doesn't.
no, she does not. It's
Oh,
that's
I don't remember that.
the whole point of the ending where they're sailing off into the sunset together.
Yeah.
I don't know how long she had. Yeah, so no, she doesn't. And as it's revealed in 2049, which is of course a different plot written by different
Mm.
people, they have a kid together, which replicants are not supposed to have.
Uh-huh.
They're not supposed to be biologically reproductive, but she is in the sequel, but not in the original. But nonetheless, yeah. So this door opens and he falls in love with her. Are you supposed to fall in love with an artificial human? I mean, this is come on here. And then it's slowly kind of you get the feel that, and as Decker does, that he might be a replicant too. And they highlight this by making his eyes glow in several scenes because the replicants have this thing. The whole film has an obsession with eyes and the eye
Yes.
motif. It starts with an eye, the eye motif, which goes all the way back to, like Jakob Burma with the eye of God. If you look at Jakob Burma's illustrations in his books, and also in some paintings like by Pontormo in the Renaissance, where the eye of God, which we inherited at the top of our dollar bills, the pyramid on the back is depicted as all-seeing. And
The all-seeing eye. Yep.
everything you do.
Masonry too. It's like a big.
Yeah, it's like a panopticon, like a pre-technological panopticon. So they play with that motif all through the film, and you can't tell whether a replicant is human or not, except by that eye examination with that Voigt-Kampff test, which examines specifically. It's centered on the eye and the pupil dilation response and the flush response and so forth. That's the only way you can tell if this person is human or not. So yeah, it's really fascinating. There's a lot of complexity in Blade Runner. There's a lot of mythological complexity and moral complexity, and and the visual complexity too. So that film has just survived the test of time like few films have. It is regarded as one of the great films of all time. Which I wrote Blade Runner scene by scene, my own little treatise on it, which is one of my best-selling books actually. I must have done something right in that. Yeah. I love that.
The crazy thing about Blade Runner, though, is like when I was watching it, like, so it's not like fast paced in the same way something like I don't know, like Star Wars would be.
It's not the Road
Warrior. Like it's not a fun movie, but it's a good movie. Like if that makes sense. Like
that was why it failed at the box office. I remember going to see it as a kid with my friends, and we got out of there, and they were like, "That was boring," and I was blown away.
My mother thought it was boring.
A lot of people do. It's it's a trance. You got to get into the hypnotic trance state of this. It's like a visual morphine or something. And together with the music, it just puts you into an altered state of consciousness. It has nothing to do with plot or action. It's just getting into that altered state of consciousness with this alternate world, this technological landscape that is a sort of overblown caricature of our own technological landscape. But that's what science fiction does. It takes also the contemporary situation and magnifies it as a metaphor to make certain things visible that would not otherwise be visible in your social situation.
And it was also a reflection of sort of the fears of the Eastern takeover, sort of the West, that was really prevalent after, or specifically like the 70s through the 90s. It started with like Japan, but then it moved to China more now. Like you saw like LA 2019 Los Angeles is it's very Asian in terms of its aesthetic, and it just sort of, but it's also artificial at the same time. Like I remember something that I've always thought was like probably the most unsettling part of the movie is when he's driving by that giant screen, and you see the Asian, or there's the Asian geisha who's taking a birth control pill.
Yep.
Like in the ad, and I don't know, that always freaked me out because but it's also because it says something without saying something, and even though it's like very brief, and I think that just goes to show how powerful movies like that are with those little details.
Yeah, and it also it came out in 1982, and it also plugs into this what William Irwin Thompson called in his book Pacific Shift, the Pacific Shift, where after World War II, and World War II is the signal for the Pacific Shift, where the Pacific becomes the new Mediterranean basin that weds not only Pacific aerospace technologies, but also electronics technologies. So you get Silicon Valley. It starts in Stanford during World War II as they're inventing electronics, and then it spreads north into San Francisco, and you get the whole Pacific Rim. And then, Taiwan makes most of our electronics, Japan with electronics, China. So it creates a whole new cultural ecology, the Pacific cultural ecology. And that film also captured that what Thompson called the Pacific Shift after World War II, which is Asian and American mixed. Once America first became involved in the Pacific as a major military superpower since World War II, we've been there ever since. But the Asians have been there forever. So we're the newcomers to that zone. But there's a lot of tension there. And the film does capture a lot of that tension.
And it's almost like Los Angeles in Blade Runner, I think, is the most important character in the movie, because it's not just a setting; it is quite literally a character in the same way that Gotham is in the Batman
Absolutely.
mythos. Like,
Absolutely.
and I think it is the perfect manifestation on screen of Spengler's World City.
Spengler's World City. I was just going to say that. That's
Mm-hmm.
exact. Yep. They've eliminated all nature. They're in the book, and the film hints at this, but the book makes it explicit that all natural organisms are gone. There are no animals, no plants, nothing. It's if every animal you encounter in the film, like the snake, is artificial.
All the rich people are on Mars now, so yeah.
A real anything, and I think in the book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Deckard, his whole thing is that he wants to buy a real, I think it's a goat, for his rooftop. He wants to save up money to buy an actual goat, not a synthetic one. So yeah, this is what happens in the late stage megalopolis. It eliminates nature, it cuts you off from nature, and everything just becomes artificial, to the point where you can't tell the difference anymore between the natural and artifice.
I think the movie Blade Runner did one thing that it most certainly improved on from the book. Like in the book, it was San Francisco. I think it makes way more sense for it to be Los Angeles. But my sort of a headcanon has always been like that. Los Angeles 2019 and Blade Runner is basically just a California megacity. That's kind of how I always
Yep.
And then, but yeah, the World City, you see the mix between the Chinese, the Japanese, the American, the Middle Eastern, and you even see ziggurats in the city, like Tyrell Tower. I think it was
Tyrell. Yeah, exactly.
The Mesopotamian ziggurat. Yeah,
yeah. That becomes even more clear in the sequel, the ziggurat, the Babylonian ziggurat. But yeah, no, you're right. The Asian presence is very strong. I lived in San Francisco for 5 years, and I can tell you the Asian presence is very strong. We rented our house from Chinese landlords in a Chinese neighborhood, and I worked in Chinatown, just right around literally around the corner from it, in a bookstore that I managed in Chinatown. So the Asian presence is very strong. So it really is, as Thompson said, a Pacific Shift, where we get this intermixture between Asia and America and the West. So yeah, I do think that the movie's, it's one of these rare cases where the movie is quite a bit better than
Yes.
The book is kind of
it's a fast read too.
It's not even one of Philip K. Dick's best books.
No. I think his best was what was the one where it's like Rome was still around? Yeah, Ubik, and I also am a big fan of Man in the High Castle. Just the thought experiment behind it. Really? Okay.
I can't get into that revisionist history thing. Oh, what if the Nazis had won? But they didn't win. So, I don't know. I tried the Netflix series and got about 5 episodes in before I gave up.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, but I still think that it's sort of
like it a lot. Yeah,
but I liked the actor of the Obergruppenführer, because he always played good bad guys. I remember he played
I don't even remember him.
Okay. No, he was.
I liked it. And I haven't read the novel, but I've read a lot of. Well, not a lot of Philip K. Dick. I would say I've read 5, 6, 7 of his novels.
Okay.
And they were all great.
Oh yeah. Even the not so good ones are pretty good. Yeah.
I'm Out of Joint was like he wrote in the late 50s, and that was stolen by Andrew Niccol for The Truman Show. It's the same exact plot. And I love The Truman Show. It's a great
Yeah.
movie, but it's taken directly from Time Out of Joint without credit.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that one because I watched half of it recently. I fell asleep because I was exhausted that night and haven't finished it yet.
I see.
But yeah, it does talk a lot about the comments on the artificiality of our society, but also the perception of the individual. It's like, is society? I don't want to say like, is society real? That's kind of a very general way of saying it, but it's like society exists, but it is artificially created in the modern world, and it's almost I don't. You could probably explain this better than I. I can't really articulate
Yeah,
exactly what I'm
it's
trying to
just
but like, yeah,
it's this guy played by Jim Carrey is born and raised for
his
the first
best
time
role, I think.
ever on television. Yeah, it is his best role. I agree. Born and raised from his entire life on television, but he doesn't know it. So there are cameras everywhere, and meanwhile, everyone outside of this bubble, it's literally a dome with a fake city everywhere, and everyone in it is pretending to be his neighbor, his boss, his friend. It's all fake. And he gets to the point where he's like, I don't know, 30, 35, and then he starts to become paranoid for
But he
good
sees
reason.
his dad. He sees who he
For good
thinks is his
reason.
dad. Yeah.
Yeah. and then he starts to realize there are cameras everywhere watching him. And then his wife, then he's suspicious about his wife. This is an actress, isn't it? So he starts waking up to the reality, and it's a classic novel. One of Philip K. Dick's strong points is his use of paranoia. Most of his novels have this paranoia about them that the world you're living in may not be real. It may be two-dimensional. And of course, this is Jean Baudrillard's idea of the hyper-real, hyper-reality. Everything in his book, America, is about his tour through America, where he says Americans do hyper-reality better than anyone in the world. They do everything fake, and Americans prefer the fake to the real, the hyper-real to the real. And that is what the film captures, is the American obsession with the simulacrum, the fake thing.
The
fake.
final act. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No,
I was going to say the final act of Goodfellas touches on that, I think, very, very, very well too.
Yeah.
Yeah, just again, like,
Dick was the master of hyper reality. I see him as a forerunner of what I have termed hypermodernity, along with some other cohorts.
Want to go and explain just for those who have not
sure
watched you before, explain what hypermodernity is?
Yeah, hypermodernity is something. It's not a term I invented. So the term I didn't invent, but the concept I did, because a few years ago, I think it was 2018. I went online and looked for, well, what is hypermodernity? If we're not in postmodernity anymore, and I've heard this term hypermodernity, what does that mean? And I went online and there was nothing, no clear, coherent definition, not a single thing.
That gives you some elbow room to define some stuff. Yeah.
Like I'm first on the mark here. So I wrote a blog essay on my site, Cultural Discourse, where I tried to capture it. It was very popular. It went very well, and it became the seed for my book, Hypermodernity and the End of the World, where I identified hypermodernity coming in 1995 when the internet was turned over by the National Science Foundation to the public. And at that point, the internet slowly, over the next 7 or 8 years, melts down all the analog media of postmodernity that I grew up with, including shopping malls, traditional photography, record albums, cassette tapes, books, the publishing industry, magazines. And that hit me like a shock in 2011. It took me until 2011 when I wrote my book, The New Media Invasion, to catch up with this and realize, because I was living in Boulder, and I went to my local Tower Records store that was there that I'd been to many times, and it was closed down. I was like, Tower Records is closed? And I went online and they said, no, all Tower Records are closed. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? And then I slowly started realizing magazines were disappearing, newspapers were disappearing, everything was disappearing. And everything has to interface with the internet. Our cameras have to be made so that they can interface with the internet, with digital photography, replacing analog photography, all of this stuff. And I started to realize we're in a new epoch here. This isn't postmodernity anymore. The technology of which was entirely analog. This is entirely digital. Film flipped over about the year 2000 to digital film, no longer celluloid. Celluloid's gone. It's a lost art form, just like analog photography is gone. It's a lost art form.
And didn't Toynbee say that? Was it him who said? Because I know he talked a lot about post-modernity. He was the one who really popularized the term. Didn't he say it began? It was. I think he predicted it. Well, he said it started in 1885. I think with the new imperialism, in
Modernity,
the beginning of globalization with the empires and people like Cecil Rhodes and interconnectivity, and predicted that it would end around 2000. But
yeah, but in my analysis, there's three distinct epochs there. There's modernity, post-modernity, and hypermodernity. And modernity does begin in Paris in the 1860s, just after the Haussmannization of Paris, after Napoleon III completely tears down most of Paris and then rebuilt it with a new ground plan. And then this inspires both Manet and Baudelaire, who were friends, to bring in the city as the new iconotype, the new archetype, the city, the city, the city. Let's get rid of all the old Greco-Roman myths, all the old Christian myths. And so Manet just paints the city. That's all you get with Manet. And so
and it's
modernity is up and running with the Impressionists. And then that's sort of modernity phase one. And then modernity phase two begins with the Cubists, with Cezanne and Picasso and Juan Gris and all those guys. Then you get modernity, where the technology is electric. It's electric technology, which it started with the telegraph in the 1830s, but now it's electric for the technology. Whereas with postmodernity, the technology is now electronic, starting with Stanford, and you get this dissolution of meaning, a deconstruction of grand meta narratives, which includes most of the great modernist thinkers like Toynbee and Spengler. Guys like that are anathematized and regarded as intellectual colonialists, which they're not. That's ridiculous.
Spengler was a super anti-Eurocentrist, but
Absolutely. So it doesn't make any sense.
like
The
you'd think that the woke left would like him for that.
You would think, but they don't. It's yeah. So then we get postmodernity all the way down to 1995, which is about the deconstruction of meaning and making fun of meaning. Nothing means anything.
Monty Python, I think that's one of my the whole Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Back to the movie. Like I don't know if you're familiar with that film,
Of course.
Yeah. I forgot if that was you who said you'd never seen it and didn't want to, but
Oh,
I
no,
knew
no,
somebody.
I love Monty Python. I saw everything they ever did.
No, but it was like the Life of Brian, great example, deconstruction of the religion or of religion.
Oh well, yeah,
And
it's funny,
then
but it's
yeah,
on.
yeah.
It's
But
got
then
its
also
own approach. Yeah.
But then also, but Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I think, is the ultimate example of that because it's poking fun at the Grail myth, at
Yeah.
the and basically deconstructing it and saying, look at how silly just this whole chivalric narrative is. The Roman, like it just doesn't make sense in society, and they make fun of it. I mean, great movie, but
Yeah.
still, it is a symptom of that
Well, we in the
deconstruction.
West, we're comfortable enough. We're starting with Rabelais, Gargantua, and Pantagruel, which comes in at the end of the 16th century. We make fun of our religious traditions in the West. Islam can't handle that. They can't. The attack on the Charlie Hebdo magazine was based on the fact that you can't draw caricatures of Muhammad. We'll come in and shoot you up. That's a problem.
Same with thing.
These guys need to lighten up because the West has allowed making fun of our religion ever since the end of the 16th century down to Monty Python, and it needs to be there. You need to have that lightness and flexibility. Islam has just got this dead wrong.
It's funny. Mormons love the show, The Book of Mormon.
Oh, they
Like,
do.
which is funny. Like Mormonism's a little goofy, very goofy in my opinion,
It's
but at
goofy.
the same time, yeah, it's very goofy. I don't want to offend anybody in my audience who might be one, but if you are Mormon and you're watching, it's goofy.
If you're Mormon,
But
get out.
but
Get
yeah,
out.
no,
Walk away.
yeah.
That's my.
But no, what's funny though is they actually took ads, in the playbill for the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Like they actually paid to have the church advertised in the bulletin
Playbook.
at the show. Yeah.
That's
I don't know. I have
Broadway magazine playbill.
yeah, like we have
Yeah.
Mormon neighbors and they saw it 3 times.
Yeah. Well,
But,
okay.
Yeah,
No,
yeah but
you have to be able to make fun of religion. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Although that doesn't happen when the religion's working. When the religion is up and running and functional as it was during the Middle Ages, no one in his right mind would ever have thought of making fun of it because it was working. It was serving the society. People were happy. They knew their place. It made sense out of the world. Making fun of something only happens when it is dying. When a genre is dying, you get Mel Brooks coming in making fun of the Western with Blazing Saddles because the Western's dead by that point.
Mm-hmm.
It's dead. So now he makes fun of it. Young Frankenstein, another great film that he did. The Frankenstein movies are dead by that point. Yeah. So that's what happens with parody. You know when parody comes along, you've got a dead system, whatever it is.
I think another good example of this. It's kind of it's a little more obscure these days, but it was like very controversial at the time of its release. Like you had a lot of Catholic organizations protesting it. It was Kevin Smith's 1997 movie Dogma. If you remember that one, it was like about the.
I vaguely remember it. I don't like Kevin Smith, so
yeah, I could take. Bro, I think he's been an asshole, but
he is.
But yeah, no, but with but what was funny was that like you have George Carlin as the cardinal who's coming and he's like, yeah, we need to make Catholicism cool again, and they have like the cool Jesus statue, and God turns out to be a girl at the end. It's like very blasphemous, but I know he's a Catholic and he did it on purpose.
I love George Carlin, even though he's a card-carrying atheist, and I'm not. But nonetheless, I find his stuff. He is one of my favorite comedians of all time. So yeah.
If only he were alive today, he'd have a lot of things to say.
Oh, I would love to hear what he would have to say.
Yeah,
absolutely. Him and Richard Pryor are probably, and Robin Williams. Those are probably my 3 all-time favorites.
Richard Pryor, now that I think of it, he was in like the worst Superman movie I remember. It was like Superman 4 or something.
No, it was Superman 3, but I have kind of a fondness for it. Yeah, it was bad, but it was bad in a funny way that I liked.
I like it in the same way I like the Schumacher Batman movies.
The which ones?
The Schumacher Batman movies.
Oh, those are terrible.
They're awful, but they're just like.
I don't like anything about those.
I don't know. I've always thought they're like. It's. I just love the Bat credit card. He's like, I never leave the cave without it. And like the first line of the movie is, I want a car. Chicks dig the car, and they just ruin the whole mythology too.
This is the one with Val Kilmer, right?
No, that's Batman Forever. That's the one with Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey. But then then it gets worse.
I thought Schumacher directed it.
He did.
Okay, yeah, that's what I mean. Okay.
He also did Batman and Robin, which is like an even bigger shit show, which was the one Arnold Schwarzenegger was Mr. Freeze, Uma Thurman was Poison Ivy.
I don't think I wanted. I don't. I drew the line after the Val Kilmer movie. I was like, okay, never mind.
Yeah, it was like there was a mad scientist named Gilgamesh who was trying to create eternal life and created Bane, but for some reason Bane wasn't super smart and he was just a dumb brute. It just ruined the entire mythology.
Yeah.
But George Clooney as Batman.
I mean, I like the two Tim Burton
Absolutely.
films. I like them, but they do perpetuate the 60s TV show with its kitschiness and everything's a joke. And
really, the Burton ones?
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally kitschy. It's kind of silly, lighthearted, yes, but
those ones were pretty dark for the time, though. From what we're thinking of the Michael Keaton, the one with Michael Keaton, right?
The two with Michael Keaton, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I agree. So Batman.
I mean, I don't dislike them. They're watchable. I don't dislike them. I've seen them many times, but the Christopher Nolan ones hit it for me, the nail on the head, because it had the same tone as the Frank Miller graphic novels. Mm-hmm. Different stories, but the same basic serious, gritty noir tone that I think that Batman deserves and needed. So for me, the 3 Nolan films are the best.
So I kind of like put them in their own league because I guess I have a very interesting take on that. Like, I don't see those as like superhero movies genre wise. I see them as legitimate pieces of like crime thriller noir cinema that just so happen to star Batman. Whereas when I think of Batman 1989, which I consider my favorite actual like Batman
movie, the original Tim Burton, really.
I like that one better than the sequel. Everyone disagrees with me, but the sequel I agree.
I like the sequel better actually too, with the Catwoman. I love Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman and Danny DeVito as Penguin. I thought that was genius casting.
I think a big part of the reason I really like that is just the aesthetic of the 89 one. The Gothic juxtaposed with the Art Deco the 1940s aesthetic. Yeah.
There's some cool stuff. I did, however, like the Superman versus Batman, or whatever it's called, Batman versus Superman.
Ooh, interesting,
Uh,
interesting
I did like.
opinion.
I didn't think it would be good, but I enjoyed the whole movie from start to finish, even though
So
I thought it would be terrible.
because everyone else thought it was terrible, I thought it was
Yeah,
passable. I
yeah.
thought it was passable, but the Suicide Squad might be one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
I don't.
Um, behind the latest Star Wars movie.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it was. It was.
What is the
I, we're,
Suicide Squad? I don't even know.
it was another DC movie. It was like a spin-off of that that particular universe with Ben
Oh.
Affleck as Batman, but it was Harley Quinn was
Come
Margot
on,
Robbie. No, but that was the only good
almost
part of
as
it.
bad as George Clooney as Batman. I mean,
No,
come on.
she was actually good in that role. She was the only good part about it. But here's the worst part. Do you know who played the Joker?
No, no.
Jared Leto.
Do I know who that is? I know the name, but I'm not sure. I don't think I.
He's basically he tries too hard to try to be a method actor, but it just comes across as try hard. He also basically runs a cult, and the only good role he ever had was when he played like a trans person in like the Dallas Buyers Club in 2014. I think he won an
That
Oscar
was a
for
good
that.
movie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the only role I ever liked him in. But he's really kind of a creepy guy. But
okay. I don't remember him because I only saw that once, right when it came out. But
yeah, hold on. I'm gonna pull up. You're gonna absolutely hate this, but I'm gonna pull up an image of what his Joker looked like.
Okay. See, nobody's ever going to top Heath Ledger. That's the whole problem. And
Absolutely.
Joaquin Phoenix tried, and he sort of got in the ballpark, but still,
See, I think the thing about like the Joker and Batman, I think Batman actually has a good immune system as a franchise, better than a lot of, because you can do a different. You can basically do completely different interpretations, and it'll still be fundamentally Batman. Like I always talked about, if like I were to do a Batman comic, I'd make it, of course, like stick true to the spirit and sort of the soul of the story. But my whole thing was like I would make the Riddler an FBI agent. I would make who's like trying to who's sent there to sort of to stop Batman. Like the government sends him, and then you have a what's his name? Harvey Dent, who doesn't literally have two faces, but he does have like a sort of he's corrupt and he has like yeah, exactly. And but yeah, no, I won't go into detail about that. That's not important, but I just think like that particular franchise, you can do a lot of things with it.
It does have a lot of semiotic flexibility to it. I agree.
Okay. You ready for the oh god, this is so bad.
Wasn't there a new Batman movie that was supposed to be pretty good? I didn't see it.
So what was good about that one is it wasn't like a crime fighting Batman. It was the detective Batman.
Ah, okay.
So it focused on like the investigative aspects of him as like, again, what he started as, like the world's greatest detective.
A Sherlock Holmes character.
And then basically the Riddler was essentially like a Redditor. He was kind of like incel-y, but like he was basically an internal proletariat like character. I have mixed feelings on that particular interpretation, but I think it worked for the movie. But my only real criticism of that movie was I wasn't quite a fan of the how they did Catwoman, because as much as I like Frank Miller, I don't like his version of Catwoman, which is what she was based on. And then I also think it was 30 minutes or even 40 minutes too long.
That's what everybody says. Yeah, it was too long.
Yeah. But okay, here is the picture of the Joker. All right. So we got to do a.
You've read the Frank Miller graphic novels?
Oh, yeah. Okay. It was heavily inspired by Year One, the new one.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
in the Long Halloween.
In the Long Halloween. But that was not Frank Miller, though. That's a different guy.
No, that wasn't. I think, was that one Alan Moore?
No, somebody else.
Okay. I remember.
Obscure. I don't remember.
didn't hold on a second. Didn't Frank Miller kind of go crazy eventually? Like he wanted to send Batman to the Middle East to like murder
Yeah,
terrorists, but then DC, it wasn't politically correct, so he made it a different character or something.
yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm glad that they did that. I don't want to see Batman in the Middle East. He doesn't belong there. It's
Because
not part of the mythology.
one of my biggest problems with like I don't read modern Batman comics, of course, because it's all Western comics are all horse shit right now.
Mhm. Oh, I'm sure
But
there.
except for Garth Ennis, um, but modern Batman in the comics is edgy, and he kills people. Like that's not Batman. That completely betrays who Batman is.
Yeah, is that? Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, it's over the
Take a look at
top.
this.
Yeah, it's over the top. Now it's a parody of the
Like
Joker.
he literally has a tattoo that says "damaged" on his head.
It's no longer the Joker.
Yeah,
It's a
they
caricature
were.
of the Joker. Yeah, yeah, not good.
It reminds me of like if there was a Batman. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, what were you
What's
saying?
that? No, nothing.
Oh, you were saying.
I was
Oh,
just
okay,
commenting on how I thought it was a parody of the Joker, a caricature.
okay. How much more time do you have? Do you have like another, I don't know, 20 minutes? I don't
Uh,
know. I don't want to keep
20
it too
minutes
long.
is about right.
Okay. And then we can always, again, we usually end up doing part twos on these. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
but, but yeah, I was thinking, in terms of films, Apocalypse Now.
Ah, my favorite.
That's a great one, especially the 3 hour version.
Yes, that's the one I prefer too. Most people don't actually, but I prefer the long version.
Yeah. And
Three and
then,
a half hours actually.
okay. So that's like Lord of the Ring, getting the Lord of the Rings length.
It is, and then a couple of, for some stupid reason, went back not that long ago, and then edited that down and cut a half hour out of that, which made no sense because I liked everything that he put back in. So I disown that third version, Apocalypse Now, the final cut.
Okay.
What a waste,
I think that might be the one I saw.
that's a waste of everyone's time.
Mm-hmm.
No, the
But
Redux, Apocalypse Now Redux is the best.
so what's funny is, so when, and again, I think that music is also, music and the like sort of Spengler's view on music, I guess, kind of plays into this as well. But when John Williams was scoring Star Wars, he like as a placeholder, like over the film, like the footage they had, he used Wagner and Tchaikovsky. And what he did for the one cool scene that was in the second prequel movie, where the clones and the like the battleships are coming down, like they're doing like the orbital invasion.
At the end,
Um, do you know what the placeholder song that he used for that was?
yeah.
Ride of the Valkyries.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
could detect the influence of Wagner on Williams' score for the Star Wars films. It
Mhm.
is very Wagnerian, the score.
And yeah, and the original trilogy has takes a lot of motifs from 1812 Overture, which Tchaikovsky wouldn't like that because I know that was his least favorite thing that he made. But
He
still,
wouldn't
it just
like Star Wars, you don't think?
no. I actually think that if Wagner and Tchaikovsky were alive today, they'd be scoring films.
Yeah, and I think Wagner would have liked the Star Wars films.
Oh, absolutely, the mythological aspect
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Um,
It is
but
in many ways a modern version of the Ring cycle.
yeah, I mean, Wagner created the modern fantasy genre. I'd argue,
Yeah, I
like,
would agree with that. Yeah,
it,
absolutely.
because I know Tolkien also really liked Wagner's music as well, and apparently he would listen to it on his phonograph as he was writing the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought he
Yeah,
hated Wagner. Oh, okay. So I wasn't sure.
no, he hated Wagner as a person, but he liked his music.
Well, yeah, everybody hates Wagner as a person. The guy was an asshole.
Yeah, even
No
Nietzsche
question about
thought he was an asshole.
it. Yeah, no question
And,
about that. But the
and when
artist
Nietzsche thinks you're an asshole, you're probably an asshole.
probably an asshole. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Apocalypse Now though. I've heard someone say that someone made an argument. It was just like I don't know. It was like some post on some forum. I was just like, I don't even remember what it was, but I was just like, sometimes I just do like free internet searches when it comes to like these things and go down rabbit holes. Somebody was making an argument about how this was before I saw Taxi Driver, mind you, that Taxi Driver is sort of in a way at like a quote unquote sequel kind of to Apocalypse Now, like what would have happened after to um like the characters that were in that situation.
Okay, not sure I
What's
follow
your
the logic on that. How
like
so?
he was arguing, and I don't really see it, but I can kind of get where he's coming from. He's like Martin Sheen's character, like after the events of Apocalypse Now, would basically become like a Travis Bickle type.
I don't think so. I don't get that
Yeah, I
feeling.
disagree with that too, but it was an interesting perspective.
I get the feeling that he achieved redemption at the end of the film, and
Yep.
that he was never going to kill anyone again.
Yeah, in the beginning it was the lonely, like he was experiencing the loneliness in the beginning, and it
Yeah,
gradually is the inverse of Taxi Driver, where
starts as Travis Bickle, and then it changes for him as
yeah,
he goes on that journey. Yeah, and then he changes and he realizes the value of life. Um, yeah, he's a character who achieves redemption. That's for sure. That's what the rain at the end is meant to, because Coppola is deliberately evoking the wasteland at the end of the film with the rain
yep,
coming down. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Hmm.
But like just the peacefulness that comes with like the rain is supposed to signify peace. But but for the wasteland, one of my favorite like themes, it's like beware death by water. But it turns out, like in the end, the twist is like what Madame Sosostris was actually referring to is that there is no water in the wasteland. You will die of
Yeah,
thirst.
there's no water to be afraid of. Good point. Yeah,
Yeah. No, but then you also die of thirst because you need water. But
yeah.
there is no water in the wasteland.
Have you ever read the original version of the Wasteland, where there's a lot of crossing out, but the facsimile manuscript that shows Ezra Pound's crossing outs, and it's available in one volume. Have you ever read the original?
I have not, which is funny because I should have, because Ezra Pound is my favorite poet.
Uh-huh.
But
It's
no, I'm
not
gonna have to take
even,
a look at that.
yeah, take a look at it, because it's not even remotely the same poem. And
Yeah,
what the great thing about it is, it shows Ezra Pound's strike throughs. So, but you can still read the text, and as you read it, you realize everything he told Elliot to leave out was correct, because it was a mess. The
yeah,
original draft, it was a disaster, and he just sculpted it down. It whittled it down, and so Ezra Pound, kudos to Ezra Pound for bringing us the Wasteland in the current version, because the original version was a disaster.
yeah. What's funny? So I was working on uh, a long form poem that I've been working on for a few months, off and on, last night, and I realized so it was basically just thematically. I was like, okay, similar wastelandy. What I mean, closer maybe to four quartets, but sort of like in the style of that. And also, I mean, the poem was called literally Faustian Winter. That's its working title. But reading it, I'm like, I think I have some good ideas in here, but this is a fucking mess, and this is getting way too long. But I have trouble editing things out because I feel like I need to say everything.
Yeah, with young writers, and I've read a lot of their manuscripts. The main problem always tends to be with writing, as you get better and better, is learning what to leave out. Learning that's a problem, because most budding writers they make the mistake of putting too much stuff in. You have to learn what to leave out.
And especially, I think one of the biggest problems is they tell, they don't show.
There's that too.
They
Yeah,
they,
there's
they
that.
just
Too
it's
much
like a
explanatory detail. Yeah, exactly. The reader
it's
can figure all that out for him or herself.
yeah, it's like dialogue, 2 paragraphs of lore info dump, and like a young budding writer trying to write a fantasy epic just
Yeah,
puts all of his info dump, and it's like, if you're gonna do that, just write like a companion, like appendices or something to it,
sure, exactly. Yes.
like Frank Herbert.
Frank Herbert?
Frank Herbert wrote an entire appendices for Dune,
Yeah,
and ended up putting an abbreviated version in the back of the book.
in the back of the book. Yeah. Okay. There was a
Yeah,
longer version of the appendices?
allegedly.
I see. Okay.
Apparently, it's lost though.
All right.
But I'd personally, in terms of the Wasteland, I would read like a version of that that's 4 times longer.
Yeah, no, it's a great poem, but what we have is great, because it's more cryptic and leaves more to the reader to fill in the gaps, which is what you should do. Leave it up to the reader. The reader's imagination will be stimulated by less, not more. Most writers who are bad writers just tend to overwrite. They put too much stuff in. That's the whole problem. You got
I
to
feel
learn what to leave out that the reader will fill in with their own imagination.
I think a great example of this, and mind you, I like his stories. I think he's a really good storyteller. But as a writer, the person I think who struggles most with this now is George R. R. Martin.
I've never read him, so I don't know.
Okay. He did a Song of Ice and Fire, which is basically like supposed to be almost like he's a big Tolkien fan, but he
Mhm.
purposefully wanted to like subvert the super fantastical elements of Lord of the Rings and make like the sort of like really cynical, morally ambiguous fantasy world that's
Well,
like
now I did try
that's
to watch the series, and I
it,
watched
it-
about 4 episodes before turning it off in disgust because there is not one likable character in there, and that's a huge mistake to make in that genre. It's not a mistake that Tolkien made. You have to have likable characters.
they're more like yeah.
Plenty of villains to dislike. You can't have heroes who are morally corrupt and degenerate, and that's all it was. So I walked away from it, and I was like, "See ya. This is
So I
good."
do think so. I think in the long run, in hindsight, looking back on that show, because I saw it when it was coming out. I saw all the seasons. The only good seasons were the first two. Like the first season, in my opinion, is a masterpiece of television, just in my opinion, and it's a pretty decent adaptation. Second one was pretty good, but then because the third season was based on the third book, everyone loved that season, but I'm like, no, this is like just a very dumb, watered down version of it that's trying to be a little over the top in terms of like the gore and violent because it's like Spangler talking about everything has to be a spectacle nowadays, like or else and even a bunch of like non-fantasy fans tuned into Game of Thrones just for the sex and violence. And it's like that's not why you're supposed to watch
Yeah.
that stuff.
No, that's not. That was evident just in those first 4 episodes.
But my main problem with his writing is like he'll take like 2 paragraphs to describe someone taking a shit.
Yeah, that's.
It's like no, you don't.
I could tell by the length of the books. I'm always suspicious of long works of fiction. It's how much overwriting is going on here, especially in the popular world. This may not apply to War and Peace, but that's functioning at a different level of literature. But in the popular world, shorter is better.
I think yeah, my main problem is because like I had been off and on. I haven't worked on it in a few years, but it was sort of a not high fantasy, but not like low fantasy either. But I'd created this really massive world with lore and stuff, and I realized like, okay, this if I ever finish it is going to be an incredibly long book. But my main problem is it wasn't so much like I was over describing things. It was just I had like 10 different point of view characters. So it was like multiple books in one, and I'm like, that's one of my biggest problems as a writer. Like my stuff is long, so
Did you ever read Stephen R. Donaldson's Thomas Covenant novels?
I have not.
Those are pretty. Those were one of my favorite fantasy novels of all time. They
Okay.
originally came out in 1977, same year as Star Wars, in 3 volumes. They are clearly derivative of Tolkien, but quite a bit different and quite good. A lot of interesting, likable characters, and the main character is an anti-hero. Is a dislikable anti-hero. He's a leper. He's dying of leprosy, and but yet all these prophecies have foretold that he'll come to this place called the Land, which is equivalent to Middle Earth, from our world, and it's fantastic. It's just really good. So I think he ended up writing 10 of those altogether, and they're all fantastic.
And what I really like though is films that because I feel like I hate like direct adaptations of films at this point unless they are like or direct adaptations of books at this point unless they are almost like exactly like it or at least true to the spirit of it. But what I really like are films that are sort of based on books but more subtle about it and kind of make its own thing. Apocalypse Now is the perfect example because it's
Heart
essentially
of Darkness.
Joseph Conrad, The Heart of
Yeah,
Darkness.
it's
Yeah.
obliquely based on it. Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's like, but it's only evident to people who've read Heart of Darkness,
Sure.
pretty
Yeah,
much.
they don't even credit it in the credits for the movie. They don't even
And
mention.
I think that makes it better in a lot of ways because and what other examples do you think you can think of that phenomenon? Because I know there are others, but
Well, I don't know. I mean, everybody always says that the movie's never as good as the book, but that's not true.
Mm-mm.
All you have to do is read Jaws and watch the movie.
Oh
The
God, yeah.
novel is a piece of garbage. I wouldn't wipe my ass with it. Same thing with The Godfather. Here again, same thing with The Shining. Here again, these films
I
are
like The Shining
masterpieces.
actually.
It's
The
bad.
themes, the isolation theme.
It's real,
Okay.
no, not the themes. The writing is it's so overwritten and sentimental and schlocky. It's just terrible. Kubrick went in and brought his intelligence and straightened it out, just like Ezra Pound did with Wasteland. So we end up with a work of art. So generally, it's the case that if you can take a novel that's bad, and because it is bad, you can translate it into another medium like film and improve upon it, which in almost every single case, most of Stanley Kubrick's films are adaptations of novels, and the novels are generally pretty weak. The Shining, Doctor Strangelove, the novel is totally weak. Even Barry Lyndon, which is supposed to be this great, classic work of art, and the film is fantastic. I went back and I read Thackeray's novel. It's pretty weak for a classic novel. It's not very good. Um, so he had an eye for zeroing in on texts that were weak and that he could translate into film. Even the novel for Full Metal Jacket, The Short Timers, is nowhere near as good as the movie. In almost every case, he has taken them and improved upon them. The only exception might be Lolita, because Lolita has it's such a masterpiece, and it has so many different qualities that depend upon the English language, puns, and all kinds of wonderful stuff going on in there that you can't translate into film. That might be the only exception, but in every other case, everything that he based a work on was an inferior novel, and he had the instincts for that. He knew it was inferior, and that therefore he could improve upon it in translation to cinema. So that tends to be a general rule, I think, that for films being better than their novels if they're pop trash, or in Thackeray's case, it's not pop trash, but it's a weak novel. His
You know,
version of Barry Lyndon.
do you know what's really interesting? Do you know who is actually hold on, really inspired by Goethe of all just of all things? Um hold on, Gustav Flaubert
Flaubert.
was a big Goethe fan.
Mhm.
And now that I think of it, it's like so. Never read Madame Bovary, but I know the story. It's
Yeah,
basically I imagine that's basically Faust if he were inverted gender and were a slut.
possibly. I haven't read it since college, but I remember it being a very beautiful novel.
Oh yeah, the parts
Flaubert's
I've read,
smooth,
writing is good.
gorgeous. This is one of the reasons why you can't take a great novel and expect to translate it into a great movie. And it's just been frustration after frustration after frustration. People trying to film Don Quixote, or Paradise Lost. You're never going to make a movie that's better than those novels because they're already masterpieces. There's no elbow room there. That's the thing. So I don't. Ulysses. There's a film version of Ulysses. It's a piece of crap.
Yeah, and
There's no way you're going to make a movie that's as good as that novel. That's not going to happen. It's impossible.
I
So
know I know you're not the biggest fan of Fitzgerald, but a good example of this would be there has never been a good Great Gatsby adaptation on film. Like
yeah,
Robert Redford's was boring, even though it tried to stick to the spirit. And then there
and
was that one that the
Coppola
Leonardo
wrote the screenplay for that as well.
who did?
Coppola did. Francis Ford Coppola wrote the
I
Robert
did
Redford.
not know that.
Yeah, he wrote the screenplay.
But
You can blame him.
and then I think the worst offender, believe it or not, is the most entertaining version of it. Even though it's objectively, I think the worst adaptation of it was the
Leonardo,
2013.
the Leonardo
Yeah,
version. Yeah.
yeah.
That-
I just
Just watching the trailer for it made me want to throw up.
it
That
was
was as
all
close as I was going to get to it. I was
it
like,
was
I'm
all
gonna throw up.
style, no substance. That's
Yeah,
literally all it was.
yeah.
And they
Which is
even,
kind of the point of the novel, right? That is kind of the point.
but
Um,
yeah, no, but it seemed like it was almost
this is a
like missing the
society of
point.
just 20s, all style, no substance, all these shallow people living shallow lives. Yeah, I understand that. But still, I'm not going anywhere near that thing. Man, that looked bad.
But yeah, no, but even
Heart of
but
Darkness,
like
I,
Fitzgerald,
Heart of
yeah, but like it
Darkness.
was like Fitzgerald was criticizing that, but the sorry, I internet for a second.
No, I was just going to say, Heart of Darkness is kind of in a different case because it is a great novel. It's one of my favorite novels of all time,
Mm-hmm.
and Apocalypse Now is my favorite film. I do think the film improved upon the novel quite a bit. but back to your point, it did so by sort of skirting around it, not basing it directly on it. We're going to translate Heart of Darkness like Orson Welles wanted to do, and would have failed. It's not a direct translation; it's kind of a reimagination. So maybe Coppola cut himself some elbow room by doing that. It's not a direct adaptation.
The one that pisses me off the most is when people claim that it's just the most brain dead take, in my opinion, that and I don't know why, like, I have such a problem with this. Like, I think I hate this take too irrationally. But people say, "Oh, The Lion King is Hamlet." It's like, no, The Lion King, it's a good animated movie, but it's not Hamlet. Like, it's like, have the people saying that ever read Hamlet before? Like, I don't know if you're.
I see The Lion King. Not even when I was raising my kid and we were watching all kinds of Disney stuff, but
It's overrated, but it's
one that I
not a
missed.
bad film. But it was, but if anything, it's clearly Macbeth from Malcolm's perspective. Like, that's how I'd all, if anything. But
Yeah.
I think people look too hard into, like, oh, this is an adaptation of this. This is an adaptation of this. When in reality, they're just recycling motifs and themes that are
Yeah.
common, that have been common throughout, like, the Western zeitgeist for thousands of years.
Shakespeare's tough because, in a way, they're plays. So in a way, they kind of are screenplays. They're meant to be performed as is, but yet search in vain for like a really good adaptation. I think for Hamlet, the Mel Gibson Hamlet comes the closest for me to capturing the spirit of the original. With Mel Gibson's very morose performance, whereas I thought Kenneth Branagh's more literal, 3-hour version of it, because it's actually 4 hours, was just overblown, and it was all about Branagh's ego. There was nothing morose about him. No one in a million years would ever believe Kenneth Branagh to say To Be or Not to Be. No one. Mel Gibson, yes, very convincing right from the start. But there's never been a good King Lear, never.
No.
Not one. Al Pacino has said that he's willing to give it a shot, but that project just keeps hovering in limbo. He would be great for it. I don't know. Yeah, Shakespeare's tough. It's tough to find good Shakespeare adaptations. There's a few, but
I've never thought, and I just have never thought that Shakespeare, at least directly, translates very well to screen. Like, they were basically the screenplays of their time, but it just doesn't work with film.
It would, because it is kind of a screenplay, but something always gets lost.
And I've always been a big, like, Shakespeare snob. Like, I actually will go to the theater, pay to go to the theater to watch like a Shakespeare, and because there's a Shakespeare theater in Washington D.C., which is near where I live. But it's interesting just to see the interpretations each time they do it, because they're so timeless that you can set it in any, like, setting and it'll make sense. Like, I saw a version. One of the best versions I saw was Measure for Measure, and it took place in Nazi-controlled Austria. It was great,
Measure?
and there was like a cabaret in the beginning, and yeah, and there was a song called Scheisse. Some guy was singing in German, and it was, but yeah,
Shakespeare's tough to adapt to. But there again,
but
classic works of art are really tough to improve upon.
And so what's interesting is I read an article, because I mean, I know you have like a lot of people who are like hardcore apologists for everything pop culture, and it was like, oh no, high culture, it's like they're criticizing high culture because they know they'll never be able to make anything as good. But they talk about, I've seen like people write about Shakespeare, and they're like, oh, Shakespeare, people talk about it as if it's high art, but it was like super low brow. Which,
sure, that
in
that
some
whole
ways,
period, that whole Elizabethan period was like the television of their day. And a lot of it's gone, but a lot of it has survived. And I made a chronology of all the surviving plays from that period, and there's a shit ton of them. I've only read, a small portion of them, but it was like the television of their time.
I mean, it's like that with all art, though, because it's only like the top 1% of art in an era are actually going to be remembered. Whereas, like, for instance, it's like only like 3% of classical symphonies are still around or still remembered, have survived. And it just really puts some things into perspective. Like, what will and what won't be remembered 500 years from now from our age. Like, is anybody going to remember like Two and a Half Men with Charlie Sheen? Probably not.
No. No. No.
Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films? Probably. I can see that.
Most likely, yeah.
So
as long as electronic technology is still around, I have my doubts about how long it's going to be around. But
yeah. So let's end just by briefly discussing. So there was a Lord of the just mentioned Lord of the Rings. Have you been following this this I say this in quotation marks, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power TV show that's like being released next month?
No, because I heard so many bad things about it. So
it looks awful.
Like, yeah, that's what I heard.
Like, it's like everything you could do wrong is like they're changing the lore too. And they're like gender swapping characters, race swapping characters.
Yeah.
And
politics.
Yeah. And now Galadriel's like a badass warrior queen, and Celeborn is dead for some reason. And
that's not Tolkien.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, because what's funny.
The sad thing is that his book, The Silmarillion, which is actually my favorite work of his,
great book,
his Bible of Middle Earth, is jam-packed with stories that Hollywood could go in there and extract, get a good screenwriter and tell the story of Beren and Luthien, right? Or whatever.
What's Children of Hurin? That's my favorite. Exactly. Have you read the actual book for that, Children of Hurin? I read it in a day.
No, I haven't read that one. No, but I know the story. The Silmarillion's mostly composed of abbreviated versions of longer versions of stories that he wrote out elsewhere and then never published. Unfinished Tales has a lot of those in them that are longer versions of the more elliptical versions of the ones in the Silmarillion. But it's sad that Hollywood is overlooking all these gems that are packed into that book. There's all kinds of great stuff in there. They could do a whole series of prequels telling the whole history of Middle Earth based on the Silmarillion. You could do 9 films just based on that.
Don't you mean all of the not the gems? You mean the Cimmerals that are buried within it?
Well, yeah, exactly. The gems. Yeah.
But so the reason that they're not doing the Silmarillion though is because the Tolkien estate refuses to like give film rights away.
Oh, really? Oh.
They only considered doing it to Peter Jackson, but Peter Jackson was done after the mediocre Hobbit prequels.
I heard he's Lord of the Rings out.
Yeah, but Amazon owns the rights only to the appendices from the Return of the King, and they're basing everything on that.
I see. Okay. So as always, it comes down to money.
And this is the biggest, I think, insult. They're adding sex scenes too. Tolkien would not approve of this. Like, this is an insult. It's an absolute insult to him.
No.
And then they said, what we want to do is we think this should be a reflection of like modern society and modern values and stuff. It's like Tolkien literally wrote in a letter that the Lord of the Rings was specifically not that. Like, that was his.
Well, yeah. It's an attempt to restore Anglo-Saxon mythology. That's the whole idea, is going back to the past, not a reflection of today's society at all. Yeah.
That brings me to this thought I had. I was thinking about writing like a kind of an essay on it about the 3 different genres and how they sort of reflect 3 different major worldviews. And I don't mean this in the political sense, but fantasy is traditionally more quote unquote conservative. And I'd mean that not in like the political, like
supposedly
Ronald Reagan sense, but like the traditional, restoring of the old order. The mystery genre is more like forward thinking, like progressive, because it's all about trying to get to an end goal. It's all about it's materialist. It's all about using the scientific method, except for Chesterton, of course, who I prefer to Conan Doyle. Father Brown stories are basically, think of like Sherlock Holmes if he was a priest, but instead of using like empiricism and like deductive reasoning, he basically uses like Thomistic philosophy and like his knowledge of the human soul and human nature. So, but then science fiction, I've always seen as, I don't mean this in like the political, like, oh, let's abolish the government sense and give babies guns, but science fiction has like a very like libertarian feel to it. So that's, I feel like that would make a
Science
And
fiction is the mythology of science. That's what it is. It's the mythical version of science. It's where the ideas are worked out that eventually appear upon the stage, many of them.
it's like,
Think of William Gibson writing Neuromancer decades before the internet appears in 1995. And he's already on the scene there in 1984 writing about it.
and it's like at face value, somebody might look at science fiction and think, oh, because it's science, so it's like fundamentally materialist. But that's not true at all, because science fiction, even like the ones that on the surface have like no fantastical aspects, are like hard science fiction, still are some of the deepest pieces of more recent literature in terms of their philosophical themes.
Yeah, science fiction is just as mythological as fantasy, just at different surface structures. That's all. Yeah.
I think in some ways even more so.
Yeah. Think of Dune. Think
Yeah.
of Stranger in a Strange Land. Philip K. Dick. It's all mythology. Philip K. Dick's universe is basically a retrieval of Gnosticism. Yeah, it's all mythological.
So I will end by well, actually, okay, real quick, I'm gonna say I've always seen Dune as more of just fantasy in space. I don't.
Like Star Wars is fantasy.
Yeah. Like
yeah.
I don't call it's Star Wars is closer to the Lord of the Rings than it is to Star Trek.
Yeah,
in terms of
Wagner and Tolkien than Star Trek. I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah.
Foundation, on the other hand, is a little more in the opposite direction.
I think it's like a middle ground. Like
there's lots of myth in there too, cosmic cycles and so forth. But Asimov was such a rationalist, man.
What's
I love
funny,
the Foundation novels. I await their translation to cinema because I think there's lots of room for improvement on those novels into cinema.
I think a TV series.
It's terrible. It's woke. I tried it.
Is it? Oh, okay. My dad told me. I think my dad liked it. I'll give it a try. But
it was terrible. It's
okay.
Pure wokeism. You'll hate it. Don't even bother. No, it still awaits Foundation.
So I'm going to end with a little urban legend that I think you might find amusing. That sort of ties the sci-fi thing together. So there might be some truth to it, but it goes that Philip K. Dick, L. Ron Hubbard, Robert Heinlein, Frank Herbert, Isaac Asimov all decided to go to a bar one night. Apparently, they're all in the same town at the same time. They get super drunk, and then Robert Heinlein says, "I bet I can create a religion before any of you guys, and base it on like a book." And then they were all like, "Okay, you're on," and they all took the dare except for Arthur C. Clarke, who apparently was also there. I don't know. He's not important to this though. But so Isaac Asimov, who's the rationalist, is like, okay, I don't want like normal religion, but I do want like I do want to create a philosophy. So he goes and creates like techno-historicism or whatever it was in Foundation. So he writes Foundation because he just can't drive himself to write something fundamentally religious because that's not how he thought. Frank Herbert did Dune. Heinlein did Stranger in a Strange Land. And L. Ron Hubbard went a step further and did Dianetics.
Dianetics, yeah. Exactly.
So that's like one of those stories that is like probably not true.
No.
It's mythological, but like at the same time, it does convey a greater truth.
It captures the truth, yeah. I read L. Ron Hubbard's Battlefield Earth back in high school. And I don't know why. Things like 1,000 pages, I read the whole fucking thing. It was one of the worst science fiction books I've ever read in my life. I don't know why I read through all 1,000 pages. But it was terrible. It was awful. It was like a parody of science fiction. And I guess it was made into a film with John Travolta.
Oh, apparently it's considered one of the worst movies ever made.
I've heard that. Yeah, I knew it would be. So.
And but apparently some of Hubbard's earlier short stories I've heard are pretty good, but like a lot of it is because his reputation is just like a lot of people are unable to separate, I guess, him as a sci-fi.
Yeah, there's probably some truth to that.
It's like if Gene Roddenberry did that exact same thing, like nobody would like Star Trek.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he might have started off on the right path, but then the whole religion thing skewed him in the wrong direction.
I think just Dune is a good example of like how that sort of thing like I'm sure L. Ron Hubbard, and then I also think of like Joseph Smith, who founded Mormonism. They were
Mormon.
clearly very creative guys who came up with all these stories and mythologies, but then they went with it and they saw that a lot of people were like taking it really seriously. They liked the power and the fame, and it just got out of hand, very similar to the Fremen Jihad.
Yeah, and the money. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Money for us always.
But all right. So
all right.
Yeah, let's plan. I guess I don't know when are you free next?
Oh, whenever, just email me.
Okay.
I'm sure we can just figure out a day.
Okay.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. Good conversation as always.
As always, Politicrat, a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks
absolutely.
Thank
you for watching, everybody, and thank you for John for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to the next one, Politicrat.
Absolutely.
Take care.